all these smart people, but nobody knows, what the F they're doing. They're just like waking up one day, oh, what do we do? And everyone's trying to figure it out. And all these like funds have invested in something that they clearly did not understand what the point was. Even the people building it were not like really understanding some of the mechanics.
When things are this bad, all you need is one little data point. Then they panic and sell even more.
In poker, when you're playing a tournament, only the top 10% get paid. And the only way you don't get that payday is if you completely bust. They just have to play it very safe and conservative and give up EV, kind of fold their hand. I think Bitcoin is perfectly designed for this coming environment, which will start probably in 3 months. And that will kind of allow like a narrative to rebuild.
There's only one way out from here, and that's up.
Today, I'm joined by Jordi. Thank you so much for being flexible, man.
No worries. Excited to be here.
You know what it was? I was watching the Gervonta Davis boxing match last night. Been watching a lot more boxing lately, which went until like 1 a.m. And usually, if I wake up the next day, I have an Adderall prescription. So I just pop that in the morning. We're good to go. I can be tired. I'll make it through the whole day. I don't have that prescription right now, so I must have woke up, I snoozed the, I don't know what the hell happened, but it's a fascinating thing. You have one little pill. It can just take it. You're wired the rest of the day. You were just at a biohacking conference. What was that like? Were you looking at some stuff like that, some nootropics? Like, what was the biohacking conference about?
Yeah, I've been into nootropics for maybe like 6-7 years. Initially, I had a roommate who kind of got me introduced to modafinil. He's like, "Oh, you should try this pill. You're going to be able to just get wired and work through the whole day." And I tried it, and it had incredible effects on me. It was really amazing. I felt like superhuman, but the downsides were brutal. Like I couldn't sleep. You start getting itchy. You get like these like mood swings.
Yeah.
It was not good for my life in general. So I had to drop that one. And then ever since I've been looking for, something healthy that still has similar effects. And I've tried a bunch of stuff. And, I found that a lot of the good stuff, your body gets used to it. So you do need to like rotate as well. I never tried Adderall though. I've never gone for like the pure play.
Cannot be good for you. I guess that's why I don't have a script. I realized that it's not good for me. I've also tried modafinil. I think it was someone in crypto who recommended it. I wish it wasn't so hard to get my hands on here, but I found it great. I didn't have those side effects. The only thing was, as you said, if you take it too late in the day, you're just fucked. You're not going to go to sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you take it like many days in a row, even if you take it early, it's rough.
Yeah.
But the thing I found is I mean, definitely like every person reacts differently to these drugs. I mean, some of them are not even drugs. Some of them are just like, mushrooms or something kind of more natural. I found people like recommending things, or I've recommended things to people, and it's kind of hit or miss. It really depends on everyone's biology.
Yeah. It's just such an interesting field. I heard Joe Rogan talking about it like 10 years ago when I was, in high school listening to a show way back before it was like the Joe Rogan experience. It was this big thing. He would just smoke weed and they would talk about, new things they were trying. And it's a wild concept where like as a society, we've all agreed that caffeine and coffee is an acceptable drug. You can take in the morning and it helps you. And then most people just stop there. They're like, well, everyone else does caffeine. I'll do caffeine. And then they never ask, they're like, is there another thing I can drink at 2 p.m. that helps me, keep me going? Is there something else that makes me think this way? It's just such a wild field where it's like, I feel like we're only scratching the surface. Lately, I think there's been more research into it, but I'm just fascinated by it.
Caffeine is actually like pretty strong.
Very strong.
It's not a weak thing. And the other one, of course, is nicotine, which people associate with smoking. And there are a lot of biohackers who take nicotine without smoking. They just kind of supplement it, and it does have some positive mental effects, which I guess is what gets people hooked to the tobacco. But you're right. And I mean, society just kind of assumes that, drugs bad, coffee good, but then there's like such a spectrum there.
Well, you said you were taking the nootropic shrooms. I imagine those weren't the shrooms that I'm thinking of. Those were shrooms that help you actively think. Like what's the deal with those?
Yeah, there's like three main ones that are kind of in that category. It's like lion's mane, chaga, and cordyceps.
Okay.
And I've taken them for many years. They don't have as strong an effect as something else, but I would put them in the same category as caffeine, and you just get like a slightly different type of boost than caffeine.
All right, Jordi, when you're not biohacking and answering thousands of questions on Twitter, that was an epic thread which we'll discuss. You're the CIO over at Selini Capital. Is that a venture fund? Is that a hedge fund? Just to give the conversation a little more context.
So it's a little bit like Jump Crypto in the sense of I've been in HFT trading for a very long time. Got into crypto, and the very natural thing to start was prop capital, doing HFT, market making, cross exchange, all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of what it started as, like just a pure prop market making HFT for crypto. And now, yeah, like there's been some venture deals, kind of trying to what direction that'll take. I think the next vintage might be good. I think the valuations we saw last year were not great, which is why we kind of laid the foot off the gas, and you didn't see us in a lot of deals because I thought the valuations were getting kind of crazy. So yeah, there's some venture, and we're also doing some kind of yield farming. We'll see what what yield farming looks like in the future. But it was a space that I understood well, and I felt comfortable to deploy a lot of capital into yield farming, understanding the risk personally quite well. So in general, it's kind of trying to do a lot of things in the crypto space across the whole range of investing.
Okay. And you said you were doing HFT and market making, that type of stuff before. You were doing that in traditional markets then, I imagine? Equities?
Not equities, but in commodities, fixed income. So more like FIC products, futures, treasury futures, that type of thing.
Then you transitioned to crypto. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I saw you on Up Only with Ledger and Kobe. I know that happened, but one of the parts that you discussed, you had medals in something like 20 games, like competing in board games, maybe something that looks like a video game. Like what was that about? This was probably pre you working in the fund industry. Like what the hell was going on there?
Actually later. So, I mean, I've been in games for a long time. Like as a kid, I competed in like kind of world youth level stuff, like world youth chess championships, world youth bridge championships, that type of stuff. Then, of course, I got into poker right after college, or during college, I should say. Like I was kind of sitting there in class, clicking on a 5-10 no limit game while the teacher was talking. I didn't get into board games till quite a lot later, but I had the strategy game bug. I met by happenstance at a poker table once, before he was famous, actually. Demis Hassabis was the CEO of DeepMind. And he had been competing in this thing called the Pentamind, which is like the kind of considered like the all-round board gaming championship that's out there. And he'd won it like 5-6 times. I mean, he's kind of like the all-time like legend in that. And yeah, just a couple of years ago when COVID started, they decided to do it online, and I decided I was going to give it a shot. I didn't know most of the games, so I had to kind of do what we're talking about with this nootropics. I mean, I had to like take something, spend like 10 hours straight studying a game, and I never played before, like Catan, Cities and Nights. There's like all these like little rules. I would just learn it in 10 hours, and then I would spend like the next 10 hours competing, and I somehow won some of these things, and I got second in the overall championship somehow.
How many people compete in something like that?
So there's a lot of people who compete in the individual events, but not many people are actually going for the all-round championship, because you need to actually have like 5 super high scores, 5 like top 1 or 2 scores to actually like have a shot. So I would say like the people who train all year to actually do it is maybe like, more like 30s, kind of like a strongman. Like the strongman competition, there's only like a limited number of people who like train properly, and like, they have the list of the games and they go through them. So I would say like about 30 people do it, very seriously. And, there's thousands of people who play like kind of some of the events, but they might just play, because I want to play like this Catan, or I want to play like this board game.
Poker's not included in that, right?
It is included. They have like a non-money version. So of course, like, it's mainly for the points. It's not for, winning money, but they do have a bunch of poker variants as well.
What's interesting about poker? I guess I've never thought of, you could play poker with just points. I've always thought playing poker without money kind of takes an element out of it that makes it so beautiful. But even with all those other games that aren't financialized, I guess you could turn all the point systems in most games into money. Like, I think that would make a lot of games more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of games in the past that used to, like bridge, used to be the gambling game before poker. Like in all the, London clubs, all the high society people would sit around and gamble like really high stakes on bridge. So you're right, like different games can take that role and have taken that role in the past. But, if it's like a family game, you don't really want to like...
Monopoly with mom. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I have heard, so I used to work at a company called Gecko, which used to be like a really large HFT firm. And before they kind of, went public and got all serious, the founders would go around to all the offices and play Monopoly with people, and they would change the money for real money. So they would kind of themselves just, actually convert all the money into real dollars and just play like normal Monopoly. So there's cases of that happening.
I guess in crypto, we're kind of doing that. This feels like a game at times with the highest of stakes. I imagine that's part of the reason you found yourself here, is that's just the way your mind works. And this is a game where if you win, The reward is it's something that's hard to capture in basically anything else. Let's assume right now in crypto, the bear cycle is the game. You had a thread last week about navigating this current spot and kind of the rules with the current spot we're in, how to put theory into action. One of the things you were talking about is me and Jason Choi. I think we were just kind of babbling on Twitter, and you quoted it, and you came out with something really nice. You were talking about value-oriented crypto investors wanting to buy cheap ETH and Bitcoin, right? That's the rational approach for any value-oriented investor right now. If they can buy Bitcoin and ETH cheap, they think it's going to all-time highs eventually. That's a pretty damn good trade. You made the case that even if, like, let's say the fair market of ETH and Bitcoin's higher than where it is today, it might still be optimal to kind of push price away from that. Can you kind of walk through why, even if the fair value of Bitcoin and ETH are higher, it might still be the optimal approach not to be buying right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people misunderstood the way how to think about this. They're like, "Oh, you don't know what the fair value is. Nobody knows what." Okay, let's not concentrate on like how exactly we come to that number. Let's just assume we all agree that, there's a value. Let's just call it 3,000 for ETH or 2,500 or 4,000. Doesn't matter what the number is. That sounds fair. Yeah, let's just put it at that. So there's still reasons why for a protracted period of time, you can have prices way below that. And it kind of revolves around the utility function of the individual participants who hold it, where, if someone is running a protocol or running a project, or, they have their whole treasury in ETH, or if it's an individual investor who has overexpose themselves to ETH, and they're kind of seeing that there's a chance that this thing doesn't do so well as they were kind of expecting, just based purely on their needs, like a fire sale need of, we need to get people to work for us for the next 2 years, and they need to get paid in dollars. So we have to liquidate, even though we know we're going to be giving up like EV. And I kind of equate this to, in poker, when you're playing a tournament, only the top 10% get paid. Mm-hmm. So there's this like period where you're near the money, you're like near the bubble, and you're about to get a payday. And the only way you don't get that payday is if you completely bust, basically. So I think, you can have a lot of participants who are in that similar situation where they just have to play very safe and conservative and give up EV, kind of fold their hand, even if it's a good hand, and its potential to win more chips is high. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now. We've had a lot of people make a lot of money in crypto over the last bull market. I think it's undeniable that ETH successfully, if it does successfully move to the merge, will be very beneficial for the price, with like the lower inflation and kind of like the more environmentally friendly narrative and everything else going for it. But the reality is we are seeing some forced selling. I mean, that's the only way that we can explain what's been happening, especially in the last few days where, equities are doing amazing over like this 2-day period. They've had like their best weekly run since like 2020. And still like, crypto gets its 9th red week. Who knows?
Maybe we go for 10, dude. This is actually unprecedented. Like, we've never had this in crypto. For people listening that don't spend a lot of time looking at the charts, 9 red weeks in a row. Like, that's never happened in, I don't know how many years this has all been around. 10 years now? It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's a lot of rumors going around in terms of who are the funds. It definitely looks like there's some fund or funds that have been forced to sell quite a lot. The fact that over the weekend price action is good. The price action during like the US hours, US business hours has been very rough. Does kind of point to, some more corporate institutional player being forced to take off risk. But I think that scared a lot of people. And the sentiment that I talked about where, people have to take some chips off the table, you're building something on ETH, or you've been holding a lot of ETH, you still start thinking about that really bad scenario, what could happen. And I think there was a little bit of FUD around this like 7-block reorg that showed up on, the Beacon chain. But those things are not very significant, but they do add this like little seed of doubt that make you just consider that, maybe diversification is good, actually.
When it hasn't really been in crypto at all. Yeah, that's a weird thing where like an event that's typically a non-event, but when things are this bad, when everyone's scared, all you need is one little data point that pushes people over the edge of, oh shit, what if I'm really wrong on this? Then they panic and sell even more. Like, even if the prices aren't favorable, even if they know that in a bad case scenario, things are probably higher in a year, they're just like, I can't take it.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with Tether, right? Like, after UST collapsed, you suddenly have people for like this couple-day period selling Tether like below 96 or something. So it's kind of what you said, like, just having this like sprinkle of doubt sometimes makes people panic.
Gosh, the tether truthers, man, they've just been out in full force over the past week. Blows my mind, the tether truthers.
You know, they keep getting proven wrong, but keep going. So
yeah, I talked to Nick Carter about that. So this last 6 months, this everything bubble retracing, every single risk asset's been going up for a long time. It got really energized during COVID as we printed money and had the expansion of the monetary supply of something like 40% in the past 2 years, right? There's just so much money floating around. That trade's now been reversing for 6 months. This everything bubble is now turned into an everything sells off trade. I was reviewing a blog post from Arthur Hayes last week where he was kind of predicting how this would all play out, like the crash, stocks coming down, how Bitcoin and ETH were going to be stuck to correlated to stocks. One of the interesting points I pulled from that article of reviewing it now, like a month later, was he said things will probably reverse before the Fed changes their stance, right? And if you look back at the top, that is what happened. Like we topped before the Fed actually started raising rates. What do you kind of think about, you've published a lot of thoughts about macro and how this all ends up big picture. Certainly not asking you to predict a bottom, but do you think that could happen, like where we actually reverse well before, it's in the headlines? Things are getting better. Fed's going to stop raising rates. Like how do you kind of plan for an event like that where it's impossible to know the time frame, but things could bottom before everyone realizes, oh shit, like things are just too cheap right now?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like calling the bottom, there's the bottom of equities and there's the bottom of crypto, and we've already realized that those are two different things. We can even see like within crypto that, BTC is going to be in one lane. It's already decorrelated from ETH quite a lot. I mean, it's held up a lot better. If you look at the BTC ratio, it's moved like 20% already. And then you have after ETH, like all these other alts, which is just a whole other level of pain. You're seeing this like absurd drawdowns, and even blue chip assets like, AVAX, Solana, like these kind of like larger L1s, which are actually trading quite cheap now, even to like a more conservative investor. I think like some of the valuations are friendly already. On the equity side, it's a bit of a mix. Some of the growth stocks have come off. Like we see ARK is just completely broken apart, but the S&P is back above 4,000, which is still, not really a bear market in the traditional way of looking at it. I mean, Arthur has been right about certain things. I don't think he's completely got the pulse of the macro environment or the Fed, although he gets some broad strokes right. I think the next months are kind of predictable in a sense. Like the Fed is going to continue, 50 bips
Yep.
For the next two, and then we'll get 25 bips. So that'll take us to 2%, above 2%. It'll be like 2 to 2.25. That's definitely going to happen. It doesn't matter like how badly everything else falls apart. And that's the point at which they're talking about pausing and like reevaluating. So I think we've had a little bit of a bounce now because different Fed members have said that after this first barrage, they will kind of stop and look around and see how much damage they've caused. And then what I've been predicting and I've been saying for a very long time, even before all of this like stuff started, is what's going to happen at that point is they're going to balance between trying to lower inflation and trying to avoid the recession. And they will just kind of keep going back and forth between prioritizing one and prioritizing the other. They will not be willing to completely just sacrifice one, just let the whole thing fall apart. I don't think they're going to do that. Actually, what we'll end up in is a period of rather low growth and moderate inflation, like around 4%, which is tolerable, but not great. So this is going to be like quite similar to a 70s style stagflation environment.
I feel like being a Fed chair right now has got to be the worst position on earth. That situation you just described of they don't want to let one get too bad, and they're going to have to go back and forth on trying to battle these things of let's not plunge everything if we keep raising, but at the same time, we have to keep inflation in check. They get so much flack in crypto, and I think the situation we're in highlights why something with a programmatic money supply like Bitcoin is so valuable long-term. But at the same time, like I do think they're doing their best. It's just such a shit spot they're in, man. Like what?
It is a shit spot, but it's completely their fault. I mean, they have been way behind the curve. 2021 was an abomination. I can look 2020. I'll give you some like behind the scenes look, because at the time I was still like mostly trading macro and I was on calls with like, some Fed governors and stuff trying to understand what was going on there. They were happy to just like throw money off the buildings just to make sure that we don't fall into this like deep recession. And they knew that some players, I mean, I specifically asked like one of the ex-Fed governors now, don't you realize that like the big institutions, the big sophisticated players, they're going to make so much money now. Like you're just giving them the handbook. You're saying like, we're going to be, they were literally telling the public, they were just saying, here is the exact time that we will buy bonds every day. It'll be like between 5 and 6, we're going to buy the 20-year. between 6 and 7, we're going to buy the 2-year. Like they were giving this out to the public. And as like a sophisticated like fund, trading bonds, I mean, we made a bunch of money. I can imagine like Citadel and these guys just made, billions just buying before the Fed and selling it to them, like just front running the Fed.
This was early COVID, right? Just to understand the timeline.
This is like, yeah, like mid 2020, right? Like after like equities fell so much, and then they just started going completely like dovish. Once they started doing QE, they were doing these like emergency like daily operations, just buying the amount of bonds that they used to buy in the 2008 kind of crisis, like the last time they were doing QE. They would buy a year's worth in like 2 days. Like it was insane how much they were buying. So bottom line is they did some crazy stuff. They started even buying junk bonds, which I completely disagree with. Like from a game theory standpoint, when the Fed bought junk bonds and kind of bailed out people who had invested in junk bonds, it just seemed completely like the referee getting involved in the game in ways that they just should stay out of it. Like if somebody invested in junk bonds, it's in the name, it's junk bonds. You're going to take some losses on it. Like if if it's the worst case scenario is happening, you should take some losses on junk bonds. But instead, they were just like backstopping them. I think they went way too far. But regardless, you can say that they managed to avoid the full kind of crisis of confidence. Fair enough. But then 2021 came around, and they just keep going and keep printing like insane amounts and like doing just a massive amount of QE, expanding their balance sheet to like many, many trillions more than it needed to be. And by the time they realized that inflation was here, they kept saying this like transitory thing, which, if you looked at my Twitter from like a year and a half ago, I was just bashing them nonstop about this like use of transitory, because it was so obvious that this thing was not going to be transitory. They had just printed so much money, like they couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. And then we just saw like 4%, 5%, 6%, like unimaginable numbers for the last like 30 years. And now we got like, it's like above 8%. So I don't feel bad for them. Like they've completely like dropped the ball. They've caused all of this. The sad side effect now, which I talk about recently, is you're going to have a lot of increased amounts of wealth inequality, because the people who cashed out and kind of knew how to, not only did they know how to play the game, they're also like very close to the pipe that was just spitting out the money. So they've kept a lot of it. It's off the table. And sure, like households are nominally they're better off. Like everyone got all these airdrops, there's like checks, like all this other stuff going on. Inflation is just eating up to their living costs. And at some point, once unemployment rates start going up as well, we will start seeing quite a large increase in public discontent, I think, even more than we saw like with the looting like in the last years.
With the Fed being such kingmakers, being like the referees of the game with so much power, where, as you said, in the past 2 years, they just started doing shit they've never done. Like they really got aggressive. Like when they have so much power, like it's a weird thing where we're all just beholden to what they do if they get this out of line with something. Like, do you think it's just this group of central bankers was reckless? Like, or is this something that's just going to repeat until the end of time?
They have politicized the Fed, and it's supposed to be an independent entity, not following what the president wants. When you had Trump, basically, I don't know if you remember a few years ago when we had Trump, but he was bullying Powell nonstop to like juice stocks up even further. A lot of what we're seeing now is actually Trump's fault. Like, people in history might forget that he's kind of the one who created a lot of the asset bubbles that ended up causing the inflation that we're seeing now, because he just wanted to get votes. But the reality is, even though we're going to potentially get the recession under Biden, a lot of the seeds were sown way before that. So Powell has obviously tried to appear independent and not follow directions, but at the same time, the president is the one who nominates the Fed chair. So there's a lot of links there that complicate things. The energy policy is a whole different thing. I mean, you mentioned gas prices. The reality is gas is also related to government decisions, and they've shut down all the nuclear power plants, which were like the cheap form of gas, especially in Europe, like in Germany and other places. There's been this like green agenda, and it's this like marketing hype where it kind of disconnects from reality, because the reality is like, it's going to take a very long time until we get enough green energy. And in the meantime, we do need gas. If they're forcing everybody to like stop investing in like the kind of energy that we have already existing. Yeah, like maybe in 20 years we'll get there, but like there's this period now where we've put so much power in the hands of like Russia and the Middle East and Venezuela even, that is geopolitically quite unfortunate, especially how what we're seeing in Ukraine is a reflection of how comfortable Russia feels that it's taken hostage the most of the European market for gas now, and no one's really stopped them.
This past 2 years has just been insane. Like crypto, I feel like moves so fast that it teaches you so much about market cycles and investing. It's like 1 year in crypto is probably worth like 5 years in investing in anything else in the experience you gain. And me seeing a lot of this stuff for the first time, like living through a period now where the money printing has stopped, and like we could be in a totally different regime change. I think a lot of people are in a similar boat. Younger crypto investors is the first time they've been through a shift like this. It's so weird because it highlights all the pros about Bitcoin and why this thing is so valuable long term, but at the same time, it hurts Bitcoin's price short term. And you had some thoughts about whether to view Bitcoin as a trade or as an investment. I think it's something that you kind of changed your mind on recently, and you referenced Light Crypto, how he thinks about it. What do you think is like the optimal approach for Bitcoin investors? Because what we're living through, it highlights why Bitcoin's so great, and having something that you can predict, the money supply, the inflation rate, the recklessness of central banks. Like it shows you why this thing is so good for people out there in the world. Should people always hold it as an investment, or should they trade it in and out? Like you've changed your thoughts on this. How do you approach it?
I've only changed my thoughts because at the end of the day, I am a trader. So as a trader, I should be able to have it in my toolkit to, at some periods of time, not have Bitcoin. I don't need to always be long, because as a trader, I'm nimble and I'm trading for 24/7. I have like the charts up and I'm trading. So I can make that decision and not miss the boat in terms of like owning some part of this network, which I think, long term makes a lot of sense. I actually don't think like most people should try to follow that. I think for the vast majority of people who are not like professional traders, just holding and investing is the better decision. But to your point of like, Bitcoin showing its worth, I think that's absolutely the case. Like we are about to enter maybe in 3 months, this period, which I think is the Goldilocks for Bitcoin. And I've been talking about this for about a year now, since last December on Up Only. I was talking about how late H2 of 23, once the money printer has stopped, and once we kind of end up in this like limbo period where everything is sort of, just bouncing back and forth in this stagflationary environment, I think Bitcoin is perfectly designed for this coming environment, which will start probably in 3 months. And that will kind of allow like a narrative to rebuild, because in 2021, even though asset prices were doing incredibly well, the reason Bitcoin wasn't doing well was because it just wasn't high beta enough. Like, it's a large asset compared to like all these like tiny things that you can move around. And we were like in this speculative bubble, and Bitcoin has no value of holding in that type of environment, because if there's just money sloshing around, your individual needs are to just get the highest return of possible, which is usually like in all kinds of like small like narratives that are playing out and moving up like 50x, like 80x, right? So Bitcoin had a rough year because it's not exactly an inflation hedge in the sense of like asset money printing. I think of Bitcoin more as like this. It's not a friendly guy. Like Bitcoin is this like brutal dictator, and there's a period where you need you need this like nasty guy, and it's when everyone is having a hard time like maintaining their wealth, maintaining their like standard of living. So that was not 2021. That's going to be coming soon, unfortunately. And that's where Bitcoin, its whole point of existence, will start to like shine through in the narrative. Will rebuild, because it'll be like, well, what are my options right now? Like equities are kind of being pushed down because there's only so much stuff out there. Like Elon says, like if you don't make stuff, there's no stuff. You can print money, but there's no stuff.
Yeah.
So the few stuff there is, the few real assets just keep going up in price, and then the Fed is kind of forced to make people poorer in essence, like in a way, in order to kind of keep the balance there. And Bitcoin is kind of outside of the system. There are flaws to Bitcoin. I'm not like one of these people who just think it's, completely perfectly designed in every single way, that for the rest of time, doesn't need any changes, and it's just kind of like this perfect encapsulation. But I do think that it's one of the few sources of light that we'll have in this like dark period that's coming.
In that Goldilocks period for Bitcoin, and I think that description is perfect, how you described why Bitcoin maybe underperformed last year when so many people point to it just kind of blindly and say, it's an inflation hedge, it should be going up. Meanwhile, if I can get 20x on Mooncoin, BSC, Shiba Inu, I'll probably pick that. Like, I know that that's a game of musical chairs, but it's like, if the game's going on for a year straight, it's not that tough to ride some of that wave. I think in that Goldilocks period you described in the next 3 to 6 months, where it's better for Bitcoin, is the inverse of that it's going to be much worse for some of these long tail alts, for a lot of the things that people have just been able to buy and say, this is higher beta Bitcoin. This is a crypto that if Bitcoin wins, this thing should win, 50x. Now we're going into a period where it's probably more beneficial for Bitcoin. Is the inverse of that those alts probably underperform in that period you just described? Like, we haven't seen a period of time where Bitcoin dominance rises in a while, and we could be setting up for it.
I think Bitcoin dominance has started to rise and will continue to rise. At the same time, I think we should differentiate crypto and Bitcoin, because you have Bitcoin as an asset class by itself, which is, this digital hard money. And then you have everything else. I'm not like that necessarily pessimistic about the rest of the industry. I think it could actually do very well, but it's not going to be because Bitcoin is doing well or Bitcoin's not doing well. It'll just be because like use cases are appearing and like new ideas, new technologies are being built out that enable more real world usage. So those are completely different games. And I think kind of viewing, this like PvP thing between like Bitcoin and everything else is not, first of all, it's not healthy. And it's not accurate either. Like, I mean, it's definitely not like good for the industry that you just have so many people with such strong opinions, either saying that, Bitcoin is like a pet rock and it's useless. And, a lot of the VCs who have done really well in some of these alts, like they'll come out and just say like, it's not even going to exist in a couple of years, like Kyle Samani, like this group. And then, you have your Bitcoin maxis who just think like everything else is.
They think stocks are a scam. They actually think stocks are a scam too, because it's not Bitcoin.
Yeah. That's the degree to which we get. So I think the reality is you have this emerging technology, which is innovating, all these new blockchains and potentially like DeFi applications or other kinds of applications. I think that will continue to innovate. It may not be this year that it does well. It may be like, a few years down the road once people kind of figure out exactly the best way that we use this technology. But in parallel, Bitcoin as hard money is a use case that it's super superior to gold. I mean, it is such a step change from gold in terms of how verifiable it is. We all know how much there is. We know where it is. We know if it's a real Bitcoin or a fake Bitcoin. Like, you can't do that with gold. Like, there's a lot of friction with gold. You can move it around easily. These are just such profound like upgrades that I think that combination will give Bitcoin a fair shot at taking a bunch of the spotlight from gold. At the same time, gold will do well. It's also a traditional hard money. It's more suited for central banks. So we're already seeing like in Europe, a lot of the European central banks have started buying gold again. Russia's obviously trying to buy some gold. So I think gold will do well. I think Bitcoin is an alternative that is potentially more retail friendly rather than like central bank influenced, will do extremely well. And, for the rest of the crypto industry, I really hope it does well. And, a lot of it is going to be facing facts and realizing that a lot of what we've done, for the last couple of years is being building on top of, meaningless protocols and saying like, okay, well, you have this thing and then I'm just going to build another protocol on top that's going to farm it. And then you have another one that's aggregating it. And then you have another one that's like swap. And it's kind of like, okay, but like, what are we actually doing? So there are a lot of use cases that will come out, but it's in early stages.
I like these tough questions, man. Bear markets, I think, make everyone consider the questions that you don't even have to ask when everything's just going up and to the right. Like, you don't really have to ask, like, what are we all doing? As long as price is going up, it's like, oh, this thing is great. It's game changing. It's financial infrastructure. Now people have to ask, do we really need this? And as we move forward, are people going to use this? Is Do we need 10 of them? Do we need one of them? Is it a winner take all? And I was reminded of that it's a tough game for everyone. I was talking to Split Capital and Dan Matuszewski of CMS Holdings last week. It was kind of refreshing to hear, partially terrifying, also refreshing. They were saying, look, it's a tough game for everyone. Like if you're out there and you don't know what to do, large funds are in the same spot. Like what we were discussing earlier, like they don't know if they should buy lower. They don't know who's unwinding.
To be honest, like I mean, and just to make that point that you're talking about now, the whole Luna situation, if you talk about like one point in like, the last like cycle that just exemplifies how much even like the funds don't know what they're doing, and like nobody actually knows what they're doing. Like we're all kind of just in this like crazy experiment. A lot of things are happening for the first time that have never happened. And we're, all these smart people, but nobody knows, what the F they're doing. They're just like waking up one day, oh, it's depegging. What do we do? And everyone's trying to figure it out. And all these like funds have invested in something that they clearly did not understand, what the point was. Even the people building it were not like really understanding some of the mechanics about Luna. So yeah, like nobody really has this like perfect insight. Some people can make good trades and they can like, kind of find like spots to like do really well on a individual basis. But in terms of like the industry as a whole and like understanding where we're going with this, I think it's a lot of discovery for all of us.
You were on the right side of that Luna trade. There's a handful of people. I think maybe there's more people that were right, but certainly only a handful that were outspoken about it and outspoken ahead of time. One of the things I've hated throughout this Luna crash is after the collapse happens, how many people stepped up and were like, that was reckless. And I'm like, yeah, no shit, it was reckless. Now it's at zero. Like you didn't say it was reckless when it was the best performing asset of the bull market. It's like there were only a few people, I think a week or two before the collapse, maybe like a month before, you were actually on a debate with a research team. And I love Delphi. I think they do incredible work, but you were kind of giving the counterpoint and saying, look, guys, let's think about this. Pretty unstable. What happens in the unwind? Did you actually trade the Luna crash?
I did trade it. I mean, there was one thing that really, I was looking at Luna from afar during last year, what it was doing well. I kind of knew sort of what they were doing, but I hadn't like really done a deep dive. And I got asked to present the bear case by people who kind of just wanted me to think through it on a first principle basis, sort of similar to what I did with Olympus DAO, or like at the end of last year. And when I looked at it, there were some really worrying things I found, including that this is similar to Olympus DAO as well. The official documents having some huge mistakes in them. And when I see that, I start worrying, because if the people behind a protocol are like not understanding their own protocol, which was the same situation, it's extremely worrying. So there was this graph, and you can also see it on YouTube, like in the official like Terra website. I don't know if it's still up, but they show like two pools of water, and you have like the Luna pool and you have the UST pool. And it's trying to convince you that the water on both sides is like an asset. And you have, 20 billion of UST and 40 billion here, and it's a $60 billion asset. And they don't understand that, no, like this 20 billion is not an asset, it's a liability. And the 40 billion needs to lose the 20, like you can't add them. Like, you're supposed to subtract them. Like, this is like so obvious. The only way you can possibly add them is if the UST is real money, it's base money. If people are willing to like never convert it and just stay in the UST and do work and go to school and like, get a degree so that they can go earn UST and keep it in UST, then you can count it as like base money. But we're obviously like so far away from achieving that. And when I saw that, I really started to worry about, do they understand the asset liability mismatch? And, I think Do Kwon is not a scammer. I think that he really, was trying to push for this decentralized currency, and a lot of his personality that, was very aggressive, that we saw like, bashing people, was potentially just driven by, he understood that, there's not enough dollars backing it. And he has to play this confidence game of like, presenting a very strong unified front in order to avoid a bank run, which ultimately like didn't work once it got too big. The reality is when you try to create base money, and I get a lot of people asking me about privacy coins like Monero, or asking me about Bitcoin Cash, or all these other kind of alternatives to Bitcoin. Anything that is trying to be base money, I'm quite bearish on, because it cannot scale. It cannot grow that much. There's a lot of things missing from even privacy coins that are not related to the technology. They're not related to, does this thing have a use case in terms of like avoiding things? Base money, which is such a rare thing, you have like the dollar, you have gold, and Bitcoin is not even there. It's like potentially trying to one day get there, where it kind of is included in that category. But there's a few things that matter so much for base money that are not even talked about. Mainly distribution. There has to be a very, very wide distribution for this thing to be like viable. You can't have like single entities owning like even like 5% of an asset that is supposed to be base money, because that can mean like they own 5% of the world, like the real stuff. Like it's just not feasible. So when you create a technology and you say like this is going to be money, you need to have a very good idea of, there's this concept of seigniorage. Like basically seigniorage is like the profit getting made by the money creating. Like the money can be used to buy stuff. Who is just getting this seigniorage? And in the Luna case, the problem was a lot of the seigniorage that was being created by UST was getting eaten up by Luna holders who were selling Luna at like really high prices. So if somebody bought Luna at like 20 cents in a seed round and sold it at $100 and made $1 billion and took it out of that system, there's $1 billion debt. And now there's this like huge mismatch that the seigniorage has gotten paid out to like this very centralized entity. So I saw Vitalik and some of these other, very smart people put out blog posts recently and saying like, is this the end of algorithmic stablecoins? And they're trying to make the point that maybe it's not the end, and there will be more situations. I think what a lot of people got wrong is, instead of asking, is this yield sustainable? Is this 19% anchor yield sustainable? Instead, what they should be asking is, where is the seigniorage going, and is that sustainable? Like, who is making money out of this thing being considered equivalent to the dollar? And is that sustainable? Like, can we have like seed round investors of like the small community of lunatics end up, owning billions of dollars of real wealth because we're all suddenly like willing to accept UST for money? So ultimately, I don't think that there is a path for an unbacked stablecoin at all, unless it's something very creative, like it's done where the seigniorage goes to charity or something, and then we all agree that we're happy with basically like using this Mickey Mouse money as long as the seigniorage goes to charity, or something like really different than the current system.
Charity or some kind of UBI solution instead of just a VC's pocket.
Yeah, something like that, where we kind of agree that this is, as a society, we say, okay, like we will accept this USTT, whatever you want to call it, as real money, as long as all the profit that's being made from the conversions into it go to some society accepted like UBI. Yeah, exactly.
There's something poetic about that ecosystem calling themselves the lunatics. Like, I know it's called Luna and that's not what they planned for, but lunatics leading to one of the biggest collapses in crypto history is just like, you can't even write this shit up if you tried.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say they're not the worst I've dealt with. I've called out different kind of Ponzi's in crypto, the Omis and the Hexicans, and they've all kind of shown me one thing, which is that when people are like really financially motivated, they lose their mind. Like, they just stop thinking rationally and accepting logical arguments, and they will just attack anybody who can possibly like FUD their bags. And the lunatics, of course, did that as well. But I would say that's saying a lot about human psychology and not so much about like that specific protocol.
What about Luna 2.0? Who is buying? Like, am I missing something? When I see this thing launch, to me, and whether or not it was bad, this UST system, it was never going to work, that was like the reason to use Luna. It was the potential to create an algorithmic stablecoin that becomes, even if it was never going to work, a base money. Like, that was the appeal. It's the same reason Solana's appeal is fast and cheap transactions. It's the same reason Ethereum's appeal is EVM and we're going to move to proof of stake. It's the same reason, you can go down the list, AVAX and its subnets. When I look at Luna 2.0 launching now without UST, like I've tried to be very friendly with it and like optimistic and say, okay, what are they actually trying to do here? Don't be just cynical because the last one went to zero. But like, what's the appeal of using Luna without the UST? To me, it seems just like exit liquidity. Like, am I missing something? Is there any reason why this thing should be relaunching? Like, how have you thought about it? Has it interested you at all?
Yeah, I thought about it a bunch, and I've been asked from a lot of the funds involved, and they're like, "What do you what do you think we should do here? Like, what should be happening?" There is some value to the ecosystem that was built after UST got created, that was drawn in, like a lot of the talent that was kind of drawn into Luna doing well, and then they started building on it. You have maybe like 20 teams that are quite good that started building on that ecosystem, and so it becomes an equivalent of, I kind of put it in this region between Phantom and AVAX, where you have a chain and there's apps being built on it that can potentially be good or attract users. How do you value that chain? And so even without UST, basically launching as just like another alt L1, there is some value to that as long as the builders stay and the technology that's already being created on it, like the wallet and like all this stuff, works well. And Luna has worked okay as an L1. It's potentially going to be able to be part of the Cosmos ecosystem. And so, I guess thinking about it the other way, right? Like, if there's just a new blockchain launching in the Cosmos ecosystem, and it has all these people building on it, and they're building different primitives and trying to do stuff, what value do you put to it? There's some value, right?
Sure.
So in terms of like the actual amount that it should be worth, I don't think it's that much. The estimate that I've been kind of whispering is in the kind of low single-digit billions. I don't think that it launching at 16 billion or whatever crazy amount it did was going to last. Of course, that was it's the usual thing we saw in Solana, right? Like, you have this like really low float, and so like the price goes up because the few people who want to buy it have to get one of the few coins out there. As these coins get released, this thing could easily go down to like $1.
That is the question, I guess, with any other chain, is like, what's the value prop? And if there are teams building valuable things, I don't at all mean to diminish their work. I've just kind of thought of it as like, that's why people were using Luna, and maybe the people that come after can build something special. Who knows? I'm rooting for them. We'll see. You talked a little bit about other crypto Ponzi's. This is a tweet that was the most entertaining thing I'd seen in the past week, because I wanted someone to take this bet. For anyone that missed it, you offered a $10 million bet against Hex. And I think it was either Hex collapsing or Hex not reaching a new all-time high. Before I get your take there and why you think that could collapse, this is this is probably the strangest part of crypto right now. There's a coin out there where, if it actually was ranked on CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap, is one of the largest coins in the industry. At the same time, there is not a single person I know, and I've been here for 5 or 6 years, that owns Hex. Like, not a single person. And I know I've met thousands of random people throughout, some degen, some full-time traders, some funds. None of them own Hex. But there are people out there that own Hex, I think, right? It's not all just Richard Hart. So there's like this weird subsector of crypto that doesn't interact with anything else in crypto, but they believe in this coin called Hex, which is not listed anywhere. It's just on its own. So just like a quick premise for people that are like, what the hell is Hex? Why should I even care? It's fucking massive, whether you believe it or not. It is. There's a lot of people holding this. What's the deal with Hex? Why'd you make a $10 million bet that this thing's going to collapse?
So Hex is this just bizarre and kind of disgusting Ponzi. Basically, it's probably the worst one, I would say, that I've seen. Richard Hart is, for people who don't know, this serial entrepreneur that used to sell Viagra pills back in the day, and then he got into crypto. He's extremely intelligent. He understands
very smart
theory.
Yeah,
he's very smart. He's also very smooth talker.
His streams are so entertaining, man. Like, I can't help myself when he fires a stream up. I'll admit it. Like, I'll watch. He roast. It's entertaining. I give him that credit.
Exactly. Unfortunately, he's using his powers for evil, not for good. So what he did is, a couple of years ago, he came up with this like ERC20 token, Hex, And he said this is like a bank CD. The problem is he's trying to create base money, which is the same thing we just saw with UST, and it's even worse actually. So he's basically saying, put your money in Hex and you get like an interest rate, and then you can just take it out and sell it, and you've made like 40%. So the thing with Hex is it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. He owns like 90% of the supply in like these wallets that are just sitting there that are his. He's distributed it across millions of wallets to make it look like there's millions of holders, but all these wallets are just like his own wallets that he's created and just given from the Genesis pool. And so what you have is this like 10% of supply that are real people that have bought this thing because they've been promised like this, CD. And, it priced it very well, as most Ponzi's do at some point. They have this like huge parabola up, and has come down. It's down like in the 90% range so far. So the problem with Hex is, he's gone out to like retail people who are not even into crypto. I've heard all these stories about leaflets being sent to houses. People get like ads in the mail. You can see like pictures of buses in Europe going around like advertising Hex. So this is not like advertising to crypto natives, which is maybe like why you don't know the people here. And then you have this like shill army that's being built on Twitter and other places. And for a while, I didn't even think they were real people. I just assumed they must be bots. They're real. They're real. It's crazy. But they're like names on Twitter, like at Hex Master or at Richard Hart, you are the number one. They're all created specifically for shilling Hex. It's not like somebody got converted. Like these were like from conception designed for this purpose. And if you mention his name on any tweet, they have Telegram groups, I've been told, where like they'll put a link, like somebody will find it, they'll put a link in the Telegram group, and all these like thousands of people in the Telegram group will just come and spam you.
Jordi, you know what's going to happen? This episode, when I release this, I'm going to get absolutely demolished by this Hexican army, dude. They're going to come at us.
Yes. No, they've been coming at me for a while. Thankfully, there's this guy, Eric Wall, if you guys want to follow him on Twitter, that he's kind of taken the mantle. So I've kind of laid back a little bit because he's doing an incredible job. He actually just had a debate with Richard Hart. You can watch it on YouTube. He kind of obliterated him. I mean, I don't think that a lot of the army behind Richard Hart will admit or, sell or try to get out. Because a lot of these guys, this is how Hex works. It locks up your tokens for years. So I kind of view it as like a Stockholm syndrome. Like these people who are supporting him, they have to support him because, their money is tied up. And the only way they will ever get it out is if Hex still has value in like, 5-10 years. Like some people have like locked up for 10 years. So it's quite a scam. I think the guy is like this cult leader, egomaniac. Shares a lot of attributes to like some of the cult leaders we've seen like in the 20th century, and it doesn't end well. At the same time, I don't think that this is like a fight that I want to fight because there was this tweet that just like made me die laughing, and I totally changed my perspective on this. He had a picture of Richard Hart. He's this kind of guy that like wears Louis Vuitton bags on top of his body and just looks ridiculous. And he has a picture of him sitting on this SUV with like all the bling and like all the stuff and the Mercedes and all this stuff. And the text below says, if this is the guy that scammed you, then you deserve it. And I'm kind of thinking like, that's kind of true. Like what kind of personality of people see this gaudy, like, dude and think like, yeah, I trust him with all my money. And, he's going to lead me to the promised land. I feel like maybe it's not the battle that I want to fight.
Yeah, understandable. One of the I spent way too much time diving into this rabbit hole one day. I'm also not fighting this battle for the Hexicans that are lining up their replies right now. Don't worry, I'm not going to tweet this out, but it's a fun discussion. One of the things that has really kind of made people interested is, as you described, he owns a lot of the tokens, like 90% or something, in these origin addresses, and so when he markets and how Hex markets, they say you're earning X amount of APY. I think you're earning like 40% interest or something is what they market. But in actuality, based on the tokens that are like available, like that 10% that the average person can go buy, like they say, okay, I can earn 40% APY, inflation's only 2%. If you take out Richard's tokens, which is all of these tokens in the origin addresses, inflation is like 40%. Like of the float that's available for the average person to go buy, like that is the rate that things are inflating away. It's 40 or 50%. Like that's how you're getting the interest. But it's this it's this game where he has all these tokens locked up, so you can say as a percentage of total supply, it's only inflating at 2%, you're earning 40%, that's 38% yield. And it's like this magical thing where, I mean, that was just one thread. And I was like, I can't even imagine how many people just look at that number and say 40% interest. We saw that with Luna. How many people look at something like 20% and they say, oh, this is a good investment. They never look at the docs. They never look at how this is actually working. Yeah, man, it's a weird thing to watch. It's like a car crash.
It's wild. It's pretty wild.
So do you think he's going to take the bet? $10 million? Have you got a reply?
He has not replied. He is, I think, it kind of, to speak highly of his intelligence. I've called him out many times on many streams. I have laid out the case very clearly. He engages with a lot of people. He's never engaged me. I'm sure he's seen everything because he gets a lot of traction. And, to his credit, maybe he's smart enough that he's realized that he should just not respond to these things because there's no way he looks good. Like he can't talk his way out of some of these facts.
Yeah, I don't know, man. And the debates he does have, he just demolishes people. It's so entertaining, dude. I don't know. I hope I hope it's not him just being evil. Maybe he actually does find a way to make it work. But I don't know. I enjoy watching him.
There is no way. I mean, I just have to cut in. He's trying to make base money be hex. There is no way that this will work. There is no exit liquidity here. It doesn't exist.
I was trying to be nice. I just find his stuff so entertaining. But anyways, for the Hexicans, don't worry. We're not coming for you. Do your thing. Do your thing in your own little bubble. The biggest challenge I think for people right now is, as we've now talked about, some of the Ponzi-esque games in crypto that people can fall into that can do very well in a period like last year. When everything's going up, it's just ride the fastest horse. Now we're going into a new environment. People have to decide Bitcoin, ETH, what's going to perform best in this new world. Should I keep holding? You have a thread called Smoke and Mirrors, and you kind of talk about principles in this Ponzi-esque crypto game, how to navigate it. Before we wrap here, Jordi, what's some of your guiding principles that might help people out? What's the premise of that blog post that you have pinned on your profile?
Yeah, the premise is if something is going to actually be sustainable and not be a Ponzi that falls apart, you need to think about who's actually willing to put money into that system, be this kind of benevolent person that is willing to fund the system, and they're getting something out of it. So what are they getting out of it? A lot of these things, if you look at them, no one really is going to be the end user. So even with something like Axie Infinity, the only way that would be sustainable if somebody's willing to put money in and get entertainment back and not be willing to play just to get more money. So the way that first principles can be applied to dissecting all these projects and understanding is there a way that a transaction happens, somebody's willing to fund this perpetually without money in mind, so they're getting something else. So a lot of people have been making fun of something like step to earn, but I think that's along the right path that we're getting to, which is it's not maybe the perfect way that it's designed, but something like that can work where people are willing to fund the app, put money into this app, and in exchange, what they're getting is motivation to exercise. And that's something that I do every day with my personal trainer. It's something that actually makes sense. So you need to have some story as to who is going to perpetually fund this thing without having financial incentives in mind. And I'm kind of looking forward to the building that's going to happen now in this kind of bear period where people will have to design around this concept instead of just, Ponzi concepts.
It's a period. It's exciting. It's challenging for a lot of people, but as you said, we could be entering a Goldilocks period for Bitcoin. The best part about this game we're in crypto is, as you said, no one knows what's happening. We're all figuring this out on the go. It's infinitely interesting. And I appreciate you coming on and kind of walking through how you navigate it, man, because it's fascinating. You've been one of my favorite follows on Twitter. I'm glad we finally got to record this. Appreciate it a ton. For anyone listening, go follow him down below. He might be on private. Maybe he'll accept you soon. But Jordi, appreciate you coming on, man. This was great.
Thanks so much.